Hello, this is Merrick Mori from SecurityGate. Let's get started with learning how to create an IEC 62443 3-2 assessment within the SecurityGate platform. Please ensure that you have an entity specified in your portfolio before proceeding with creating an assessment. To get started with creating the assessment, click on the Assessments tab on the left navigation column to reveal the ISA/IEC Standards section. Click on the ISA/IEC Standards to be presented with the ISA and IEC Assessment Management page. Click on Schedule New Assessment to begin the assessment creation process. Provide an identifiable name for your 62443 3-2 assessment and assign it to an entity. Select a primary contact from the specified entity for your assessment. Specify a due date and the assessment type. The correct assessment type is named ISA/IEC 62443 3-2. Select the risk matrix suitable for your assessment. You may use the default risk matrix provided by SecurityGate or use one that you've created from the Risk Matrix Management page. To double check that you've selected the correct risk matrix, click on the Preview button next to the Risk Matrix Selection dropdown. Feel free to also refer to our Risk Matrix creation video for a walkthrough of the Risk Matrix creation process. Because I plan on completing this assessment personally, I will select the checkbox below. Optionally, select a reviewer if you'd like a user to review the assessment before it is considered completed. Proceed with the next tab at the top of the assessment scheduler. In the Zones and Conduits tab, pressing on Add will let you add to the Zones and Conduits bank. Any information added within this bank will be globally persistent across assessments. Each zone or conduit require a name and optionally a description for each. After creating each item to the Zones and Conduits bank, be sure to select the checkbox next to each, and then select the Select button to confirm your choices for the assessment. In the Systems tab, pressing on Add will let you add to your Systems bank. Any information added within this bank will be globally persistent across assessments. Each system requires a name and optionally a description for each. After creating each item to the Systems bank, be sure to select the checkbox next to each and then press on the Select button to confirm your choices for the assessment. In the Components tab, click on the Add button. You will be presented with the Components bank. You may manually add each component by clicking on the Add New button, or if you're utilizing SecurityGate's Nozomi integration, press on Add New Nozomi. Once again, after creating or importing each item to the Components bank, checkbox each component you'd like to include for the assessment before pressing on the Select button. In the final two tabs, feel free to add any assumption items or attach relevant files. Press on the OK button at the bottom of the assessment scheduler to finalize the assessment creation. You will see the newly created assessment populate within the ISA/IEC Assessment Management page. Simply begin the assessment by clicking on Start Assessment. You will be presented with an initial risk assessment page that contains an informational overview of the IEC 62443 3-2 assessment, as well as 3 initial risk assessment questions. You may also add your own questions to this initial risk assessment section. Feel free to resize columns, provide your responses in the answer column, add supplementary observations, attach files, and remove any custom questions. At the top of the page, be sure to review important keywords by clicking on the Definitions button. Also, clicking on the ZCR Requirements button will help provide guidance for completing the initial risk assessment. Once you have completed the initial risk assessment, click on the Next Step button at the bottom right of the page. You will then be presented with a page dedicated to identifying threats and vulnerabilities. The page will be initially blank, but will populate response fields once you add at least one threat vector. Scroll down to the bottom of the page and click Add Threat to get started with adding your first threat vector. SecurityGate's default vector list will be presented in the pop-up menu. Feel free to select and submit the threat vectors included in the list, or press on the Create button to add your own. Once you've pressed on the checkboxes for the threats you'd like to identify for this assessment, submit them by pressing on the Select button. For each row, be sure to specify the zones and/or conduits that the threat vector applies to, and specify information relating to each column. Press on the Next Step button to proceed to the next section once completed. In the Determine Unmitigated Risk page, you will be presented with 3 drop-down options for specifying the target SL category, a target SL, and a relational operator condition. Selecting the risk rating category will use the risk rating values inputted when creating your specified risk matrix, whereas selecting the risk rank category will use the risk rank values from your risk matrix. Selecting the target SL dropdown will display a list of risk rating or risk rank matrix coordinates. For supplemental guidance on this section, refer to the ZCR Requirements button at the top of the page. Additionally, click on the Risk Matrix button at the top of the page to assist with completing this section. Selecting the condition greater than will give the user the option to send any submitted threat vectors that meet the set condition to the mitigation workflow if the score is higher than the target SL. Scores will be represented as a coordinate on your risk matrix. Proceed with providing likelihood and severity information for each threat vector. Additionally, provide a consequence description for each threat vector in the event that the threat vector is left unmitigated. Press Next Step when completed. Your score for each threat vector will be evaluated for mitigation based on your target SL and relational operator condition. In this walkthrough, I will choose to mitigate each threat vector as their scores do not yet meet my target SL. You will see threat vectors that met your condition in the mitigation workflow. I'll choose to mitigate these options so that I'll be able to provide mitigation details in the countermeasures page. If the threat vectors have a score you're happy with, you can simply press on Accept/Transfer. You can also defer threat vectors to move it to the remediation workflow for future review and evaluation at another time. When finished with your drop-down selections, press on Next Step. For each threat vector you've chosen to mitigate, input your mitigation countermeasures and updated likelihoods and severities for each. Proceed with filling in the information like the previous step, but for the current state of countermeasures that you've inputted. Remember that you can always attach observation notes and attach files for each, if needed. Press on Next Step to proceed. If your threat vector scores didn't meet the set mitigation condition, that means that you've successfully mitigated the threat vectors to meet the target SL. This is the case with the example in this walkthrough where I am taken directly to the CRS or Cybersecurity Requirements specification page instead of the additional countermeasures step. Complete the CRS questionnaire to finalize the 62443 3-2 assessment process. Provide your answers in text format in the answer column. Feel free to specify additional observations using the pencil icon and attach files if necessary. Additional questions can be added at the bottom of the page using the Add Question button. Upon completion of the CRS questionnaire, feel free to press on the Submit Assessment button at the top or bottom of the page. You will be presented with your completed IEC 62443 3-2 assessment. Feel free to contact a SecurityGate representative if you have any further questions, and thank you so much for watching.